What's going on, everybody? We're back. The Sooners Illustrated Podcast, episode 7, Siete, on this Tuesday, August 8th, 2023. Josh Callaway, Tom Green, James Jackson. We'll catch up with Colin Kennedy a little later in the week. Things are moving all over the place. We recorded a day late here than what we've been doing on Mondays because we had open practice and interviews yesterday. Colin's traveling around. It's kind of getting to be that time. It's busy times. We're having to kind of shift things around a little bit as we figure this thing out a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. But appreciate everybody that's subscribed to the podcast so far, man. We're growing pretty fast. Got to thank the Sooner fans for that. Appreciate you guys.
Yeah, seems we're getting good feedback too. Glad you guys are all enjoying our babbling for hours at a time. But now we're doing what we can to keep you guys in the loop and keep you up to date with everything that's going on now that fall camp's full swing.
Yeah, good times. Yeah, we've gotten into fall camp, and it's been great to see the YouTube channel get up and over 1,000 subscribers. It's actually blowing right by 1,000 now. The practice videos have been doing really well, and the podcasts have been doing pretty well. So majorly appreciate everybody. And again, subscribe, completely free to subscribe to the YouTube. So do it. And you get to see all the player interviews and practice footage that we're allowed to get out there. And then once the season starts, press conferences, game highlights, stuff like that, we're all going to be on there as well. So it's a good thing. If you're a fan, it's a good thing. It's free. And then, also, if you're a listener of the show instead of a viewer on YouTube, leave a rating on Apple or whatever you watch on. Leave a review. That stuff's extremely helpful as well. We're off to a great start on that stuff. So appreciate everybody. Yeah, 5 stars. I think last I checked, it was like we've had 7 ratings and they're all 5 stars. So low number on the ratings, but they're all 5. So do the trade-off. So far, so good, though. So as we get back to it here, fall camp is in full swing. Last time we talked to everybody, last time we did a show last Thursday, we had yet to see the team with our own eyeballs. That was the first day of practice that day, which was not open to media. Since then, Friday's practice was open to media, and then yesterday's practice, which was their 4th practice, also was open. So we've gotten to see the team for a couple practices now with our own two eyeballs. Impressions. I mean, you can take it any way you like. A guy who looks to be in great shape, or a position that looks thin, a position that looks deep, whatever. What do you guys think? What's some things that in the couple practices we've been at has stood out to you here in the early part of fall camp?
Yeah, I think one of the things that's evident, right when you get out there is just the size of that defensive line now compared to a year ago. They got 4 guys that are above 300 pounds, 2 more that are just a pound or 2 below that on the official roster. So, they're probably floating around that range too.
Yeah.
And just looking at how they've kind of restocked that position. I spent a lot of time yesterday watching that group, and they were rotating 4 or 5 deep through the drills. And I know, they have the numbers to do that right now. It's just about finding the guys that they feel they can rely on when the games actually start being played. But just looking at them, they're passing the eyeball test right now in terms of how they look at that position compared to a year ago.
I like where the running backs are right now, basically on how they look as well. Like, those guys look really, really big for running backs, man. Those are some good, nice sized guys that are, they were plowing through this drill yesterday, and it was just like, man, they got some size on them. They can quick. They're moving around. They look really good so far. I like what DeMarco Murray's done with that group.
Yeah, and on that note, we spoke to Javante Barnes yesterday, and I was just really impressed with him all around. Just the way he handled it. Because he was like the last guy to talk to us, so pretty much everybody was circled around him, and he was a good interview. Sounds like he's taking a really good approach to the season. He understands the opportunity that's in front of him now that Eric Gray is gone, but also is really supportive of those other guys in the room. I mean, he was talking about how, when he missed time in the spring because of that foot injury, getting that foot injury addressed, it wasn't too hard for him because he liked seeing his boys eat. He likes seeing Gavin Sawchuk get his chance. He likes seeing Marcus Major do his thing. And I think that they understand that, they're going to find strength in numbers in that position. And, just with the wear and tear that running backs go through nowadays, it's important to have multiple guys that you can count on. And I think they all kind of understand that right now.
Yeah, I completely agree with the defensive line. the size of the guys and the number of guys when they're just running through the things, and you can kind of feel like that's a lot of options there. Then Javonte Barnes, I made this joke yesterday on Twitter, but he's moving into Madden create a player territory with how jacked he is and his speed moving around the field. He, if anyone, if I had to pick one individual guy that's looked like to be in incredible shape, that's probably the pick for me. He looks fantastic out there. Any other in particular guys? Obviously, we talked about a couple positions that we like. I agree completely. Defensive line, especially that interior. We've talked about the defensive ends very deep, but that interior has looked really nice so far in a little bit we got to see. I agree completely with James. Running backs on a whole, Javonte Barnes in particular, but Marcus Major looks really darn good as well. But any other guys that you're like, dang, he looks to be in great shape, and I'm interested to see what he looks like when the games get going.
Yeah, I think we've heard a lot about Jaquez Petway, but I mean he's a dude that looks the part. He does not look like a freshman. He looks like he's ready to be a Power 5 wide receiver. There's been a couple other guys that have looked really impressive in that group. Jalil Farouk has looked nice, and Austin Stogner. They just seem so grateful to have him back, especially after Braden Willis's departure. Having a guy who's familiar with the school, so it's an easier transition for him. But we've heard a lot about him and just his playmaking ability through these first few practices. I know Brent Venables kind of singled him out for some catches he made those first couple days. Jeff Levy was really high on him yesterday, and just talking about how good it is to have a reliable veteran like him to kind of lead that group, because it's a position where they have questionable depth behind him. So I think they're very grateful for how he's coming along in his second tour of duty here.
As we looked at practice, I'm so happy that I gave the quarterback room what I gave them so far, because they looked really, really good so far. Just as a unit, the guys are looking pretty good. Even like Jackson Arnold and Dylan Gabriel, we always talk about, but Davis Bell he's towering over the other quarterbacks too. By the way, like that guy is really, really tall, and they all have pretty good spirals, pretty good balls going down the field. So really excited about that group as well.
Yeah, and when we were out there on Friday, I spent some time watching the linebackers, and I was just impressed with kind of how Justin Harrington was kind of taking on a vocal leadership role with that group during individual drills. I know he's competing for time at that cheetah position, where they got guys like Dasan McCullough working there. They got Reggie Pearson and Peyton Bowen getting some reps there too. So for a guy who, he's obviously been around, especially compared to those other guys competing for that spot, but is still doesn't necessarily have a starting job locked down. I think it says a lot about his maturity to, still be a vocal leader in that room when he may or may not start. We'll see.
Yeah, I agree completely with everybody you guys mentioned. Justin Harrington long has kind of been looked at as like a really good he always stands out in practice. He just does. He's one of those guys. He crushes practice he's always every fall camp, every spring camp. It's always like Justin Harrington looks great. That's nothing new. And he is a very solid player. And the potential to play a lot of snaps, frankly, at that cheetah spot, as Dasan McCullough is still raw and brand new. And something we kind of forget with McCullough, who looks fantastic as well. But something we kind of forget about him is that he's been transferred in, and everybody's really excited about him, and rightfully so. I mean, he's got all the tools to be a phenomenal player. This is his second year. He was a freshman last year. Like, he's not some veteran guy that they had. He's played 1 year of college football at Indiana. So maybe give him a little more leash than you're tempted to, in generally speaking. I agree with James on the quarterbacks. Jackson Arnold looks fantastic. That was something that impressed me back in the spring, seeing this team. Similar things like, open practice every week or so. It seemed like every single practice, Arnold got better looking and better looking and better looking. And even, just yesterday we're out there, he looked as sharp as I've seen him. I mean, those out routes, those deep ones in the corner, everything is right where it needs to be. Mm-hmm. And for what it's worth, Dylan Gabriel's looked great too, in my opinion, in these practices. I thought he's looked really, really sharp. So both guys look solid. Dylan Gabriel's going to start. There's not exactly a battle there, but it's nice if you're an OU fan to hear probably that I think both guys have looked really, really sharp in what we've got to see. Obviously, we're not really seeing live bulls. We're not seeing defense rushers attacking these dudes or anything like that. But in what we've gotten to see, it's looked nice. So So yeah, we've had a couple open practices. We should have at least a couple more. No more this week, but we should have a couple more. Anything else from practices before we move over to the interview side of it?
I mean, there were a few things. These weren't things that necessarily impressed me, but just things that I kind of made note of. Yesterday saw Jacob Lacey back out there working with the defensive tackles. He was wearing a blue vest, so he's limited, but it's good to see him, out there and, getting some reps in after going through the blood clot scare this summer. We'll talk about this more when we get to the offensive line breakdown, but Savion Byrd seems to be getting all the reps with the first team at left guard while we've been out there. At least I know they're still rotating some guys in there, but he's been the guy that's out there with the first group at the starter practice each time. Just looking at their options on special teams with the punt return, first day out there, we saw 7 different guys fielding punts. Peyton Bowen, Gavin Freeman, Drake Stoops, Billy Bowman, Andrell Anthony, LV Bunkley Shelton, and DJ Graham. So I'm really curious to see just how that plays out over the next month because, special teams is often overlooked, but, that can really, flip the field if they get the right guy back there.
It seems like these players, when we talk to them a lot, they kind of talk a lot about their teammates, which I think is a good sign that, this team is becoming a cohesive unit. We talked to guys like Jalil Farouk, and he talked about, Drake Stoops, Gavin Freeman, guys like that. We talked to Walter Rouse. He talked about Andrew Rain, trying to just get him acclimated to the new system. We talked to Jared Kanek, and he was talking about Danny Stutman. So, I mean, there's these guys are really talking about the other players, and they're giving in-depth answers when we ask about the other players on the team and the other guys in their units. And I think that's a pretty good sign going forward.
Yep, agree completely. It's been 2 practices, but everything looks good. Guys look bigger, generally speaking. Like we've highlighted, a handful of guys here that have looked especially to be in good shape and bigger, faster, stronger, that sort of thing, which is Oklahoma. That's been a big priority of the offseason, just kind of improving physicality and everywhere, right? I mean, you go 6 to 7, you kind of want to improve everything. And so far, I mean, it's 2 practices. You try to reel yourself in from overreacting anything, but looks good. I think the team looks sharp. Every position, even the ones we were concerned about, have looked better than I thought they would. Like we said with the D tackle room, tight end room is concerning. We'll break down that position probably next week. I think sometime that position is concerning, but we'll get there. But like you said, Tom, Austin Stogner, they are very fortunate to have him back. We'll see what he can do out there. And a couple other guys who have been kind of surprises kind of rising up that depth chart a little bit at that tight end spot. So we've been in practice a couple times, like we said. We've also got a chance to talk to a bunch of guys. Obviously, we had Media Day, which we recapped last week, where we talked to a million people. Since then, we talked to Brent Venables again on Friday for about 15, 20 minutes or so. Then yesterday, we got to talk to Jeff Lebby, offensive coordinator, and we talked to 6 or 7 or so players. Some of those you can watch on the YouTube channel. I think I got 3 or 4 players plus Lebby on there as well. Brent Venables on Friday is there. What stuck out from those guys, from what we've gotten to hear from either going back to Brent on Friday or Lebby and players yesterday? Anything in particular that stood out to you guys there?
James?
Oh, you going? Okay, let's make sure make sure I'm trying to give you a chance now. Yeah. I like what Brent Venables has said. After the first practice, the first practice that we saw, but some things, trying to figure some things out. Obviously, trying to get that acclimated. He said there's going to be guys getting less reps than they're used to, but that's just because there's added depth to this team this season. And Walter Rouse talked about that yesterday as well. You're getting less reps, but you have to take each one like it's the last rep you're going to do. You got to really put importance into that one. And he thinks that will help them, when they get in sticky situations during the season, taking those big 3rd down, 4th down reps, just like they do in practice, it'll come natural to them. And I think that's a big difference from what was from last year. Obviously, the depth has been a big talking point for a very long time now since the second year started, but that's where we're at right now.
Yeah, and that was kind of the big thing with Jeff Lebby yesterday too. It's we've heard the term competitive depth so many times.
Yeah.
Even since James and I kind of started covering this team, we've probably heard it hundreds of times already at this point. But Jeff Lebby said just walking out on the field, Like, it's noticeable how much bigger this team is than last year, how many more bodies that they have that they think that they can count on. And, that just seems to be, across all positions. Sure, they still have some questions like at tight end and, kind of that second line on the offensive line, but they feel really good about, just the quality depth they have, obviously at quarterback, at wide receiver, at running back, certainly. And that's just on the offensive side. Defensive side, we've talked about how they've kind of restocked the unit there, especially along that defensive line and that front seven. So,
Yeah.
yeah, again, just the quality depth has been pretty evident, from the little that we've seen so far.
Yeah, for me, yesterday getting to talk to Jaleel Farouk a little bit, he's the kind of the guy, right, in that room. And it was interesting to hear him kind of like going back to what James was talking about with talking about your other teammates and having great things to say. And he was like, people were just going down the list of all those guys in that receiver room of guys, and he was just had nothing but great things to say. But especially we talked about Callaway, stuck out to me because you can tell other players know when a guy, is going to be something. And Petaway continues to get rave reviews. Farouk had some nice things to say about him on the YouTube, and also Drake Stoops. I asked him about Drake Stoops because just, we've heard nothing but, from last season through the spring through this offseason that Drake Stoops is essentially a coach on the team. And that's how Jill Farouk phrased it yesterday, saying he holds everybody accountable. He's the most consistent guy. What you're getting every single day. And so it's just nothing we didn't already know about Drake Stoops, but to hear another guy, somebody who's his peer, Jaleel Farouk, who's been on the team multiple seasons now, right at the top of that receiver core, kind of speak that way about him. Not like some young guy or a coach, but another guy who's older, be like, yeah, he's a big help to even me. It just goes to show what Drake Stoops has become for this team and this program. He's going to be even more than what he's doing on the field. He's going to be missed after he's gone, after this is his last season. Just from that standpoint, they're going to need somebody to step up in a leadership spot whenever he goes, because it sounds like to me he's got a captain spot pretty much locked down in stone, essentially, based off what we've heard. So that was interesting to hear that from Farouk a little bit as well. So other players we got, let's see, I didn't get to catch all of them. We heard a little bit of Jaron Kanik, who seems like he's coming along more and more. He's another guy who's looked really good at practice so far. Sam McCullough. We also got Walter Rouse, who talked about his health. So he missed essentially the entire spring. Sounds like he's in a good spot there. Like Tom mentioned, we got pretty much what looks to be the starting offensive line, at least for now. We're going to break down the offensive line in full in just a minute. But anything else from the players before we shift over to our offensive line breakdown?
I guess just going back to Justin Harrington, I mean, he talked a lot about how he studied a lot of Isaiah Simmons this offseason as he's kind of getting used to playing more of that cheetah position. Obviously, Isaiah Simmons is kind of the poster boy for that position in Brent Venables' defensive scheme. He's a first-round pick. He was ACC Defensive Player of the Year. I think he won the Bednarik Trophy too that year at Clemson. So, I mean, he's trying to study his film, kind of pick up on him, get a little bit more comfortable in that position because, they're going to need him there with Deshaun White gone.
Yeah, I like where Jaleel Farouk is at mentally in terms of trying to take over that wide receiver one spot. It seemed like he pretty much understands that's his to lose at this point. Emmett Jones talked about him, interviewing for that position each and every rep, each and every day, which is obviously just a metaphor for how he plays, not actually how he speaks to us during the interviews. But like where he's at right now, he seems like a guy that understands his role and understands what he has to be for this Sooners offense to be explosive the way that we've seen over the last couple of years. So I like where he's at right now.
100%. So yeah, we keep on rolling through fall camp here. We're actually recording this show a little early today on Tuesday, a day late, but early in the day on Tuesday because we're going back to Norman this afternoon for more player interviews. So it's that time of year, keeping the things rolling. So we'll have more for you in due time. We'll get back out of practice, I'm sure, early part of next week as well. So continue to learn more about this team. It's going to be week one before you know it, already August 8th today. So moving over to our position breakdown. We've been doing this every show. If you haven't been with us, go back, check them out, catch up to this point. We've been taking one position each episode, breaking it down, the names to know, standouts, depth concerns, how strong the position is, and we close it out with a rating 1 to 10 on how good we feel that position is going to be for Oklahoma in 2023. We've done 4 positions already, so we're moving right through. We're at the halfway point today. We're going to do offensive line. So we've mentioned a couple times here, kind of in passing in this show. It looks like Savion Burr is going to be that other guard spot opposite McCade Metallier. So that first team, if you will, O-line, Walter Rouse, Tyler Guyton, the tackles with Andrew Rame, your center. That's 2 starters back from last year, Rame and Metallier. Also, Guyton and Rouse would be taking over for Anton Henderson and Wanye Morris. And then Chris Murray would be getting replaced in this scenario by Savion Byrd. What do we think? General thoughts about the offensive line. Obviously, Bo Beatonbow has gotten a rep, and rightfully so, as being kind of the offensive line coach in the country when it comes to putting guys in the NFL. Sooners have got a laundry list of dudes who are getting paid right now at the next level up front after being coached by Bill Beatonbow. Guys talk about that every time. Walter, I talk about that, back in the spring, saying, I got 1 year college football left. I want to get to the NFL. Bill Beatonbow's kind of the guy to do that for me. General thoughts on this group and what this group could be. It's an interesting one. It's kind of volatile. Could be really good. Could be maybe even a weakness if things don't go right. What do we think about this group?
Yeah, I think those 2 tackle spots, they should feel really good about.
I agree.
Bringing in Walter Rouse, having him healthy now after he missed the spring, kind of recovering from that shoulder injury. He seems to be doing really well now. James had a story about him up on the site last night, so check that out. And then Tyler Guyton stepping into that role at right tackle, I think they feel good there too. I think the bigger questions are on the interior of the line. Obviously moving McCade Metallier over to the right side. That's where he played when he was at Cal. So he's got plenty of experience there. And, he's been good in pass protection. So having him on Dylan Gabriel's blind side should help hopefully limit some of those sacks that he took last year. But he's a guy that hasn't been great in run blocking. So we'll see what kind of progress he's made there from last year to now. And then, Andrew Rame back for another year starting at center. You would think that he's going to keep improving there. And then again, Savion Byrd's been that guy that we've seen out there with that first team, but Troy Everett's a guy that Jeff Levy had some good things to say about yesterday, Appalachian State transfer who arrived in the summer. He's moving around to a few different spots. They like his flexibility. He's seeing some time at center there behind Andrew Rame because they have a big question about who's going to be that backup guy, whether it's him or whether it's a Joshua Bates or a Nate Anderson. But really just interested to see kind of how that interior of the line really shakes out and whether it's going to be Savion Byrd emerging at that left guard spot or whether Troy Everett can push him in these next few weeks as he gets a little bit more comfortable.
I like, what we talked about with Bill Beatonbow being a very, developing type of coach. You see that all the time and kind of got to see a little bit of that in practice for the small chance we got to see of him. And he was really just egging on to the guys about this small step that they were making. It was like, don't drop your foot. Step, it's like that little bit of difference can make a big difference in a play. And it's just like you see how he's done such a great job with these guys. And I think that's why guys like Walter's coming over to OU and finishing out his career here and trying to be that guy for OU, because this offensive line, I'm not sure entirely just yet on where they could be and where they are right now, because there's so many question marks in terms of how would they be a cohesive unit, not necessarily the players that are going to be out there on the field. And I think that's the biggest difference. Now, we talked about is 4 guys that we know are going to start, and the left guard position, the one that we're not entirely sure. Although speaking with Walter yesterday, it sounds like Byrd is the guy that is going to get that spot. They've found a touch with each other, trying to figure out where to do on that left side of the line. So just trying to see where they are right now. That's the biggest question mark, I think, and that's going to affect the score a little bit. Not necessarily entirely sure where they are, and I think that's the point.
Yeah, I agree with Tom's assessment that the tackles here are really, really solid, at least on paper. I feel like Tyler Guyton and Walter Rouse both, and I'm not saying that both are going to get to this point, but I think both guys have all Big 12 and maybe back end of the first round potential. They do, especially Tyler Guyton, because his size and everything that comes with that. We've gotten to see that a little bit. He played a little bit last year, made a few starts. And Walter Rouse obviously was fantastic at Stanford, and he's an incredibly smart guy. Obviously went to Stanford. He was a finalist for the William Campbell Trophy, which is the academic Heisman. Like, he's a really smart dude, and both those guys are imposing. And I love the tackles on this O-line, which those are the key spots, right? I mean, and especially it's going to be, with Tyler Guyton being over there. Dylan Gabriel is a lefty, obviously, so Guyton's going to actually protecting his blind side. But if Arnold gets in there, it'll flip. So having strength on both sides is huge for Oklahoma. Interior wise, the guards, they got to prove it. McKay Mettauer, we talked about this last week a little bit when Jeff Lebby kind of just proclaimed that he was going to be a starter. I would have picked McKay Mettauer to be the starter if I had to pick somebody, just guess. But he didn't have the season last year that really justified to most people just being day one at fall camp. No, he's starting. He was a starter last year. Like, he didn't have a great season. He just didn't. So, he's got to prove it a little bit. He's got to prove it. The other guard spot, got to prove it. Savion Byrd has been a guy we've heard a lot about for a long time. He got to play in that Cheez-It Bowl. He plays with a passion and energy that's awesome. Got to reel it in a little bit. Can't be getting personal fouls and stuff like that. But he's a fired up dude. He gets after people. He was mauling people in that Florida State game in Orlando last December. And then Andrew Rame is another guy who, kind of similar. I mean, a great start to his career, a little so-so. There's been some questions about, his maturity at times, things like that. Certainly could be really, really good, but also, like, it wouldn't shock me if you saw that, his year kind of get away from him and he gets replaced at some point. That's why they brought Troy Everett in to be another center option. So there's a lot of volatility here. This is probably the hardest group to score so far, and maybe will be the hardest period, because, like I said, I love the tackles. Guards are a little, so-so. We'll have to see. And then the center could be a strength or could be a weakness, kind of depending on how things go. So with all that combined, it's hard to get a good feel on it.
Yeah, I'm really curious to see just how things kind of play out with two of those transfers. Obviously, we talked about Troy Everett. Caleb Schaefer's a guy we haven't really touched on today, but he's a guy that can, if McKay Mettauer is not making that, next step at right guard, can he be a guy that pushes him for that spot? He's got experience playing both those guard spots, I think. And you don't bring in someone who started 31, 32 games, however many games it was he started in Miami, Ohio, with the expectation that he's not going to contribute in some way. Whether he can get a starting job remains to be seen. But, I do think obviously offensive line is a position where, you need a little bit more depth than you do at some other positions, just because if one of those guys goes down, I mean, it could wreck your whole season.
Injuries happen. These are big dudes. They get rolled up on. It happens. It happens every season.
Exactly. Yeah. So kind of curious to see where those, two transfers kind of slot in there and whether they can push for those starting jobs. But like we said, it seems like Savion Byrd is kind of the favorite to be that starting left guard, and Troy Everett kind of that utility sixth guy right now, who can play a few spots along the line.
And then, can't forget the two Jakes, both in their second year, Jake Taylor and then Jacob Sexton. Jacob Sexton was named a starter for the Cheez-It Bowl last year when Wanya Morrison and Anton Harrison, Wanya Morris, both opted out of that game. Your two tackles were Tyler Guyton and Jacob Sexton, but Jacob Sexton tore his ACL on that fateful day. He actually tore it, we found out, in warm-ups and tried to play through it. You can't play through a torn ACL. So that didn't last for long. But it shows how insanely tough he is. But where do those guys fit? I mean, we know Sexton's not 100% yet, but Brent Venables said he should be good, pretty much a full go by the mid to late part of September. Does he factor in? I got to imagine he's one of the first guys on deck at one of those tackle spots if Guyton or Rouse go down. So there's some depth here. There's some options. It's kind of similar to kind of the wide receivers in a weird way of, like, there's a lot of guys who could do it, but not a lot that have proven themselves. So it's going to be an interesting group. These ratings could be all over the place. Let's go. James, you're up first. You've been
just real quick to talk about Jacob Sexton, because I covered him in high school when he was at Deer Creek, and kind of a guy that at the last minute, in just right at the playoffs time, to go play defensive tackle as well for the Deer Creek Antlers, and took that team that nobody thought was going to be a great team, took them all the way to the state championship game. So that was like you can see what kind of team player he is, and you kind of want to see him get that opportunity with the Sooners right now. So coming off that injury, that was disappointing to hear last year when he got hurt, and he's out there now. So that's a good sign for OU so far. Getting to see him out there and actually be physical a little bit, not entirely, off limits, just a guy just working on him by himself. He's actually in there with the unit sometimes. So that's good to see in terms of his development, in terms of his recovering from that injury.
So what's your grade?
What's the grade?
Let's go. Now, this is, like we said, this is the hardest group to pretty much gauge at this point, because you can't really just go off, they got, this guy, and this guy, and you can flip one guy in there. You got to go off of the entire unit as a whole. So right now, if I had to give it one, I'm going to go 7.2. And I say that with an inflection on purpose. It's on purpose, because this is a group that can obviously get very high on the list and can go down from here. This is the one of those groups I'm not entirely sure which way it'll go, but I'll give it a 7.2 at this point just to see. Let's put them right there in the middle. This is about a C average offensive line unit, C in terms of grade school stuff. So let's see where they are from there.
Josh?
I don't disagree with James' assessment there. I was going to go 7.75, 7 3/4 for the O-line. Like I said, I love the tackles. I really do. I think both guys, if you're making, when we do the last show before the season starts, we might try to do some bowl predictions. Like Guyton and Rouse both being all Big 12 is a feasible bowl prediction, in my opinion. I love the tackles on this team. But yeah, the guard, it remains to be seen. And Andrew Ream could be really good. But there's been some questions off the field, and, just kind of how that's all going to shake out is going to be interesting to watch. But at the end of the day, Bill Beatonbow is Bill Beatonbow. You definitely, you tend, he's one of those guys who has earned kind of, the benefit of the doubt, generally speaking. So yeah, 7.75 for me on the O-line. What about you, Tom? Go for it.
Yeah, I'm kind of falling in between you guys here at about a 7.5 is where I'm going to clock in. Again, like Josh said, the tackles you feel really, really good about. It's good to have a returning center because, he's got that rapport already with Dylan Gabriel, so you don't have to worry about, too many snap issues. Can Andrew Ream take that next step? Again, questions at the guard spots, but, it seems pretty early on that they feel pretty good about Savion Byrd emerging as that option at left guard. I think depth is the biggest question here, whether they're going to have those guys behind the guys that they can count on if needed, because you are going to rotate offensive linemen through the game. You're not going to – those guys aren't going to play 85 snaps each. Those are big guys. That's a big ask of them. And again, Bill Beatonbow, give him the benefit of the doubt. Not a guy that you want to bet against when it comes to developing an offensive line.
Exactly. Yep.
100%. So there you have it. That's our offensive line breakdown. That's 5 positions down, 5 to go. I think we'll do linebackers on Thursday. So get your mind right. Linebackers, a really deep spot. That's Brent Venable's baby. Should get a pretty good score, I think, from us when we get there on Thursday. So that's it for the football portion. We do have a little bit of basketball here on the way out. I'm not going to talk about it real long. Oklahoma made their assistant coach hire yesterday. Clayton Custer, welcome back. I'm sure a lot of fans didn't even know Clayton Custer left, quite frankly. He left and came back in the same offseason, which is a rarity. Clayton Custer, of course, most fans probably know all about him. He's been on the staff, but he played at Loyola Chicago under Porter Moser. He was on that Final Four team.
Missouri Valley Conference Player of the Year that year.
Yeah, really good player. Coached under Porter Moser at Loyola Chicago. Came over to Oklahoma when Moser took the OU job. And then he just left. I think it was like in April maybe to go back to Loyola as like a higher ranking assistant. But then Emmanuel Dildy leaves. Porter Moser calls him back up. Say, hey, got a promotion for you essentially. And now he's back. He was gone for like 4 months. So Clayton Custer's back. Any thoughts about this? Like I said, we don't need to talk about it real long, but any thoughts about the hire here for bringing Custer back into the fold?
Yeah, I mean, it checks the boxes of what Porter told us last week that he was looking for an assistant coach. He wanted a guy who was familiar with his system. Check. Played point guard for him for 3 years at Loyola Chicago and was very successful. Knows how he coaches, knows his style. Check. was with him for a season on staff at Loyola Chicago as, director of player development, then followed him over to Oklahoma where he had that role and he was director of video operations too. So, and then wanting someone who's going to stick around and, help build this thing for him. Clayton Custer is not a big name coach per se, but, he's up and coming. He's 28 years old. He's relatively young there. So you think that he's a guy that's going to stick around and kind of, get settled in this coaching industry and, kind of grow with a guy who he is very familiar with over, the last, almost a decade at this point, having played for him, having worked with him, having seen firsthand how he approaches things and how he coaches. So it should be a seamless transition. Obviously, a guy that a lot of these players, at least the returning ones, are familiar with, the staff's familiar with. So, really seems like it's probably one of the best case scenarios for Porter Moser. I don't think that Clayton Custer is necessarily going to be a guy that gets poached right away, just because
really young. Yeah,
he's young. I don't think a comparable Power 5 program or major program is going to come take him away right away. Obviously, it was different, when he left from, a support staff role essentially to an assistant role at Loyola, which is a mid-major, but then to come back and have the opportunity to be an assistant coach at a, major college, I think is going to be big for him. So, Porter didn't waste any time. It was 10 days less than that between Emmanuel Dildy leaving for Duke and filling that role. So, probably best case scenario, like I said, because you still got about 90 days before the season opens. Guy that's familiar with everything, so ready to roll.
It's the best hire to have at this point, this late in the process, because you can just plug him right back in. Obviously, it sounds like a guy that just wanted a bigger role on a coaching staff. I mean, he was either going to be at Loyola Chicago or Oklahoma. So giving him that opportunity to come back and now get a chance to be, the guy that does more for this staff, does more for the players, something that sounds like he was wanting. And now Porter Moser had that opportunity to give it to him. So an ambitious guy like that, it's got to work out well. It's got to work out well because you got somebody that's really trying harder to prove themselves and to prove that this team can be better.
Yeah, I like it. I mean, what do we talk about? When Emmanuel Dildy left, there has been zero goose egg continuity on the roster, on the coaching staff. Since Porter Moser took over, that's not all his fault, obviously, but that's just the way it's been. And so you bring Custer back, it kind of restores a little bit of continuity. Somebody who actually has been around. He'll have been literally the only guy. Now, granted, he's been gone the last 4 months, but he won't have missed a season. He'll be the only guy, period, outside of Porter Moser, player, coach, whatever, that will have been with this team from the time Moser got hired to now. You know what I mean? So that helps. I mean, that's nice. And like Tom said, you don't have to catch him up. He knows the system. He played in. He's coached with it for several seasons now because he goes back to Loyola. So, yeah, I think it makes a ton of sense. And, good on Porter, able to lure him back to Norman. So good get. I mean, obviously, could you have done something a little more splashy, I guess? Sure. But I like the continuity aspect more than bringing something in brand new. So nice hire for Oklahoma there. I agree. I think that's it. So we had a little bit of a shorter show, not too much, but continuing to roll through fall camp here. Like we said, we have interviews coming up just here in a little bit. That's why I recorded early. So we're going to go down Norman for those, and we're going to have Colin on Thursday's show. Talk about all the latest recruitment. Obviously, they picked up a commitment just last whatever day that was. Josh Isosa committed from Edmond Santa Fe. We're going to break that down more on Thursday's show, as well as talk about Jaden Nickens' impending commitment this weekend. Also, that Caden Durham guy is committing this week as well. We'll figure out what's going to go on with that whenever that decision comes down as well. So a lot to talk about with Colin on Thursday. So we'll be looking out for that. And, of course, we'll continue to break down the latest from fall camp. And we're going to do our breakdown on the linebackers on Thursday as well. So a good show coming for you up later this week. That's it for us. Appreciate you tuning in. Again, subscribe to the YouTube. Subscribe on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you like to listen. Leave us a rating, all that good stuff. We'll be back on Thursday. And continue to keep up with Oklahoma.247sports.com for all the latest from fall camp. There's been a ton coming out so far, and we've only just begun. A lot more to come throughout the rest of the month. That's it. We'll see you on Thursday. For Tom Green and James Jackson, I'm Josh Callaway. We'll catch you next time right here on the Sooners Illustrated podcast.
See you.